Good morning. So today I want to talk a little bit about OpenSearch. The talk will actually be divided in two parts. So in the first half, I will talk about the project itself, what it is, what it can be used for. And since this is an open source conference, I will also talk a bit about the impact that OpenSearch will or has on the open source ecosystem. A little bit about myself. My name is Jochen Kressin. I'm a co-founder of FloraGun GmbH. We're the makers of SearchGuard, which provides security and alerting for the Elastic Stack and OpenSearch. FloraGun was founded in 2012. We're located in Berlin and have also partner offices in Seattle, New York, in France and in Mexico. And as a disclaimer, before I start, I'm neither employed by AWS or by Elastic. So my story with search and security dates back already since 2004. So I started with using Lucene for various projects, especially for full-text search. And as you all know, using plain Lucene was always a little bit of pain, especially because of scaling issues, high availability, and stuff like that. So when Solr came out, I personally switched to Solr because it solved many problems already out of the box, especially clustering, replication, and stuff like that. Then I switched to Elasticsearch. Why? Well, because Elasticsearch is a great product. It has a huge adoption rate, and it especially has a great ecosystem. That was something that I always, missed a little bit at Solr. So Solr as a search engine is also a great product, but the ecosystem from Elasticsearch was just greater. And since this year, we switched to basically OpenSearch, which came out beginning of this year. So yeah, the search and especially security history is already since long time. So let's have a look at OpenSearch and what it means for free and open source software. So I will start with just what it is. So this is taken from the OpenSearch website. So it is a community-driven open source search and analytics suite. And the interesting thing is that it's derived from the Apache 2 license, the last Elastic 2 Apache 2 license version of Elasticsearch and Kibana being 7.10.2. So it basically consists of a search engine as a core and a visualization user interface called OpenSearch Dashboards. And since OpenSearch is completely Apache 2 license, of course, anyone can do anything with it, like use, extend, monetize, or also resell it. So what is the status? Well, OpenSearch was first announced in April 2021. So it's a pretty new project, you can say. The first release of OpenSearch 1.0 was in July 21. And at the moment, the most recent version is OpenSearch 1.1, which was released in October. OpenSearch is, like I said, an Apache 2 license version or fork from Elasticsearch 7.10.2. So it contains the core features of Elastic 7.10.2 plus plugins and features and extensions from OpenDistro for Elasticsearch by AWS, and we'll talk about that in a minute. If you're interested in the overall roadmap of the OpenSearch project, OpenSearch is developed in the open, so the roadmap is also freely available, which you can reach under this URL. So let's have a look what OpenSearch consists of. So OpenSearch consists of, first of all, the open and Apache 2 licensed version of Elasticsearch. And the last version was 7.10.2. So I guess many of you know that Elasticsearch had two parts, the Apache 2 licensed free part, plus commercial products, commercial add-ons, also known as XPack. And of course, OpenSearch only consists the Apache 2 license code of Elasticsearch and the Apache 2 license OpenDistro plugins for Elasticsearch. So if we have a closer look at the capabilities of OpenSearch and what it consists of, we have the OpenSearch search engine and the dashboards, the visualization part. But you also get a lot of plugins that are being shipped with OpenSearch. So on the one hand, you have let's call it the usual suspects. So you have security, you have alerting, you have a SQL interface, and you have plugins for index management. But what you will also get is more advanced plugins in the area of machine learning and anomaly detection. So for example, a k-nearest neighbor algorithm. Anomaly detection is built in, async search, a performance analyzer. And on the right-hand side, this is at the moment in the making. So this is about replication, means cross-cluster replication for OpenSearch. And a new project is called Data Prepper, which is a data pipelining project for OpenSearch. So as Elasticsearch, OpenSearch also has a plug-in infrastructure, so anyone can contribute either to the core of OpenSearch or write a plugin for OpenSearch or OpenSearch dashboards. And by the way, in this talk, I'm using the terms OpenSearch and Elasticsearch, but I always mean OpenSearch/OpenSearch dashboards or Elasticsearch/Kibana. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just using OpenSearch and Kibana. So if you want to have a closer look, there are a lot of resources on the web. So of course, you have the project website under opensearch.org. There's a community forum where you can ask questions around any part of OpenSearch. Of course, the source code is free, so it's hosted in GitHub. And I can personally recommend taking part in the community meetups. I think at the moment they're bi-weekly, if I'm not mistaken. So you can tune in and ask questions. They will talk about the roadmap and next features. And sometimes partner companies present their products for OpenSearch as well. So this is always a good meeting to join. So having said all of this, one of the first questions regarding OpenSearch is always, so does that mean that OpenSearch is in fact a fork of Elasticsearch? And the answer is yes. OpenSearch was forked from Elasticsearch 7.10.2, so it is a fork. Why 7.10.2? Well, that was the last open source Apache 2 licensed version of Elasticsearch. But it also adds feature from OpenDistro for Elasticsearch. OpenDistro was a project also by AWS before OpenSearch came into being. And OpenDistro for Elasticsearch was a set of plugins for Elasticsearch. So they basically took the Apache 2 licensed Elastic code, the Apache 2 licensed OpenDistro code, bundle it together in OpenSearch and OpenSearch dashboards. OpenSearch is completely licensed under the Apache 2 license, so there are no, let's say, proprietary or commercial modules or plugins. So it's a typical Apache 2 licensed project. But it also means that, of course, OpenSearch does not include any of the non-Apache 2 licensed feature of Elastic. So everything that was known under the term XPack, like the commercial offering of Elastic, this is not part of OpenSearch, of course. Now the big question is, who's behind OpenSearch? Well, OpenSearch is a project initiated by AWS, but as we will see, it is it's modeled like a typical community project under the Apache 2 licensed. So Amazon is what they call the primary steward of OpenSearch today, which means it was initiated by AWS, but it's designed to be a true community project. So if you want to participate, if you want to contribute code, if you want to contribute documentation, answer some question, whatever, you can just go to the website, to the GitHub repository, open a pull request, talk with the developers, and participate in the ecosystem. And when I say it is initiated by AWS, it most importantly means it's not an AWS-only project. So it's not that AWS has the only control over the project. There are already some players like Red Hat or SAP, Capital One, Logs.io already have joined this project. So it's not only backed by AWS, but by other major companies as well, and of course by the community. So there's already a lot of contributions by individual developers. So if you're interested, the project is looking for participants and maintainers. So you can go to the website and maybe you want to be a part and maintain one of the repositories. Okay, now you can say, okay, this is all well and good. Now we have a fork of Elasticsearch and Kibana, and it's Apache 2 license, and it's backed by some big players, and it's a community project, and I can use it any way I want. But the main question, because it's an open source conference, is why? Why did OpenSearch came into being? The main reason for OpenSearch were the license changes of Elasticsearch. So this started in until January 2021. Like I said, you had the Apache 2 license code of Elasticsearch, and you had the proprietary license code, which was called XPack, which had a lot of add-ons like security, like alerting, like cross-cluster replication, things like that. And then in January 2021, there was a license change by Elastic, which means that the Apache 2 license was completely removed from Elasticsearch. And at that point in time, it was replaced with the SSPL license. Now, many of you probably know the SSPL license from MongoDB. I think they were probably the first ones, I'm not 100% sure, to use that license. So this is, of course, not an open source license. It's not approved by the OSI. And then you had other parts under the Elastic license version 1. This applied to the commercial add-ons. Then in February 2021, there was again a license change where the Elastic license version 1 was replaced by the Elastic license version 2, which is a very permissive license, but it's not approved by the OSI. So it's basically not an open source, an OSI-approved open source license, yet it is very permissive. So that means while you had before a clear distinction between Apache 2 and the Elastic license regarding the code, it was moved into one repository where you can choose between SSPL or the Elastic license version 1. So it's a dual license model. And then the Elastic license 1 was replaced by the Elastic license version 2. So there was a lot of changing of license in this project. So what does it mean for open source? Well, first of all, it means that Elasticsearch is not an open source anymore in the sense that it is not under a license that is approved by the OSI. So the Elastic license version 2, permissive but not approved by the OSI. SSPL, also not approved by the OSI. And the main difference or the main point is that you are basically not allowed to offer Elasticsearch as a managed service anymore. So before you could just take the Apache 2 license version of Elasticsearch, build your product, offer it as a managed service to your customers, but the Elastic license version 2 explicitly forbids running Elasticsearch as a managed service. And it also means if you want to participate and if you want to contribute code or whatever to Elasticsearch, this is now also not possible anymore under an OSI-approved open source license. So you can contribute still, of course, to the project, but it would be either under the Elastic license version 2 or the SSPL license. Now the big question is, or the elephant in the room is, again, why? And the background of OpenSearch is basically, it's centered around cloud offerings. So in the beginning, of course, you had the Apache 2 licensed code. And then I think it was in 2015, AWS offered a managed paid service based on the Elasticsearch code. So this was called the Elasticsearch service. And that was just a service running on AWS, like you can run any other service on the AWS cloud, and then you, of course, need to pay for that service. And in 2017, there was an offering from Elastic called the ECE, Elastic Cloud Enterprise, launched in 2017. Okay, so now the question is why the license change? So these are just a couple of quotes, and I have quotes from Elastic and AWS, so I'm trying to present the two sides of the story. So the standpoint of Elastic is that AWS did something with the Elasticsearch code that, quote unquote, was not okay. And when reading the blog and other materials, you can see that the change from the open source Apache license to the Elastic license and SSPL license was clearly geared at cloud providers as Amazon. So first of all, the Elastic standpoint is that what AWS did was not okay, that they did not contribute back to the Apache 2 license code, that they were just taking the code and making tons of money with it without contributing anything back, which they say that it's inconsistent with the norms and values of the open source ecosystem. Now, if we take the position of AWS, they're saying that, well, they started the project because they wanted to have a true open source project out there, and developers embrace true open source software because basically you can do whatever you want with the software. You don't need to pay attention to license terms, and you don't need to involve a lawyer if you want to do anything with the software to check if this is okay. And they said that of course, they participated in the Lucene and the Elasticsearch ecosystem and contributed code back. So that's kind of the position of AWS. Regarding the community, there was basically, well, different opinions. Some in the community said that, of course, if you start a project and if you put it under a free and open source license, this means something, and you have the moral obligation to uphold the, let's call it, spirit of open source software. Others say that while you can argue that probably it's, I don't know, morally debatable, but Amazon had the rights to do whatever they did with the Elasticsearch service on their platform. Why? Because it's an Apache 2 project, and of course it allows also making a service out of the code and making money with it. Others said that, well, I can understand the change in the license of Elastic because Amazon went too far. And while it may be legally okay, it's probably morally not okay. And then you had voices that said, well, okay, it's on the foreground, it's like talking about licenses, but it's really two big companies fighting against each other. So it's corporate versus corporate. So that brings me to the question, do we need to kind of rethink free and open source software? So let's talk a little bit about what free and open software means. If you bring it down to the core regarding the, let's say, Apache 2 license or MIT license, what it basically says is, okay, so here's my software, do whatever you want with it. So you can use it, you can make money with it, you can change it, you can, I don't know, combine it with your own product. So do whatever you want with it. But of course, it would be great if you could contribute back to the project. And the goal, one of the goals, let's put it like that, is of course to get more developers on board, get contributions, not only to your code, but only to documentation, maybe participating in answering questions and stuff like that. So just get developers and contributors on board to drive the development of the project. Of course, you also want to make your project known in the open source space. And what you probably also hope is to increase the adoption rate because, well, it is free, you can use it, can do whatever you want with it. So the hope would be to increase the adoption rate of the software. Of course, there are other motivations and goals behind it. Making the world better, contributing code to everyone, hoping that someone will build an even better product based on your code and stuff like that. But from a pure product point of view, yeah, you want to get developers on board, drive development, and increase your adoption rate. Now, in practice, if we take a look at some of the open source projects out there, you have to say many of them remain hobby projects. They never gain enough traction to take off. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's good to have, the freedom and the space to come up with new ideas, come up with new codes, just put it out there. Let's see if you can get some traction. Let's see if you get some interest in it. And if some projects, then die because you don't get any traction, okay, that's fine. The projects that are out there and are maintained, many of them struggle. I mean, let's be honest. Many of them are one-person projects, which means it's initiated and maintained by someone who probably has another job, like a regular 40-hour job, and does everything in its spare time. So the projects lack funding, they lack developers, and of course they lack time. And the projects, the most successful projects out there in the open source space, they're mostly backed by larger companies. That could be a foundation, like the Apache Software Foundation. It could be someone like Red Hat, but there's some funding coming from some larger corporation. And as another example for that, there's the, I never know how to pronounce it, Happy.js project, which is a JavaScript framework. And this was, or is, also widely used in other projects. This was the typical example of a one-man open source project. So last year, I think it was in summer last year, there was an announcement that the project is struggling, and one of the main contributors wanted to basically abandon or quit the project. Why? Again, lack of funding. That was the most important or most problematic point. So this is from his announcement. So for him, it was just financially not feasible anymore to continue with the project. And another thing that I found very interesting, what he says here, is that when he announced that there's some problem with funding with this particular project, it was not that companies using his framework were approaching him and saying, okay, so we're using your framework, it's a great product, let me help you with some funding, or maybe with some development resources or whatever. So he says that the majority of the companies just tried to find another framework doing the same job, which is also open source and of course free. So that was pretty interesting, because you can say, okay, well, if I use something and it brings value to my own product and my own offering, and I am a company, then probably I want to make sure that this project lives and survives, and maybe you want to fund it. But that's not what happened with this particular framework. So what is my personal opinion about this whole thing that's going on in the open source space? Well, first of all, my personal opinion is that if you want to start a project in the open source space, you should choose your weapons and your license wisely. And you need to really understand what the license that you're choosing allows and what it doesn't allow. Because it's either free and open source software or it's not. So what you shouldn't do, or what you shouldn't expect, is that you can get all the advantages of an open source project, like contributions, traction, adoption rate, and then at the same time avoid the disadvantages that the license that you've chosen probably brings. And it could also be that free and open source license is not the best license for your project. Again, understand what the advantages and disadvantages are of the license. And once you have chosen a license, you should probably stick to your guns. Means you should probably stick with your license. Of course, you can develop other let's say add-ons or services or whatever, or other features, and put that under a commercial license. Of course, that's perfectly fine. but the stuff that you have put under open source license should stay under an open source license. So in that case, just wonder if what would happen if, for example, Lucene would change its license and say, well, you can't, it's not open source anymore, and here we're placing restrictions on it. That would be a huge disaster, I would say. So another learning is that a wide adoption rate, in my very personal opinion, is probably only possible if you have a very permissive license. So if we have a look at projects like an Apache web server, Nginx, MySQL, or the Kubernetes stuff, Lucene, of course managed services are explicitly allowed because they're Apache 2 licensed projects. And just wonder what would happen if Apache or Nginx suddenly would decide, well, okay, here's the code, but you can't offer it as a managed service anymore. I mean, how many of you are using something like Nginx or Apache or a product like that as a managed service? Okay, some. So, of course, and this is also the a model that for example, NETWAYS, of course, offers. So it's managed services of open source software, which you can use and leave the maintenance to, in that case, NETWAYS. And I think my major learning from this debate regarding open source, not open source, Elastic, AWS, license change back and forth, is that free and open source software is not a business model. And I think this is the most important point. Free and open source software is more like a philosophy, like rather than a business model. It's backed by ethic, norms, and values. You know, share your code, be open as possible, collaborate with others, and stuff like that. But it's not any means to generate revenue. So if you want to start a project and you want to put it under an open source license, like the Apache 2 or the MIT license, you need to find a way to finance your product or your project. It's not like, okay, I'm just doing open source and then, you know, somehow it will generate money. No, you have to think about how to generate money before you even decide for or against a license, right? So if you say my complete project is under Apache 2 license and it stays under the Apache 2 license, of course, be prepared that someone will take your code, I mean, hopefully, because it proves that your code is has some value. They will take your code and, you know, incorporate it into their products, doing managed services, whatever. So this is basically then perfectly fine under the Apache 2 license, for example, but it also means for yourself that you need to find a way to finance your product. And it could be, you know, the usual suspects like commercial add-ons, it could be professional services, could be support, it could be that you get some financing from some other company, could be that you could go under the umbrella of the Apache 2 Foundation, you could find some sponsors. So there are a lot of ways to actually generate revenue and make your project sustainable. But it's not based on the Apache 2 license. This is something else. So before deciding for or against an open source license, think about how you would finance your project. And the other learnings when, you know, thinking about the OpenSearch fork is forking is easy, developing is challenging, and maintaining is hard. So you can, of course, go to any open source project, and you can fork it, and then you have a fork, okay, and then it sits there on GitHub. But making it, you know, a viable and sustainable project requires more. And especially in case of OpenSearch, this is interesting because what OpenSearch is, it's not just a fork of the Elasticsearch code and the Kibana code. That's just one part of it. You can say they're trying to fork an ecosystem. Because, of course, it's not just Elasticsearch and Kibana, it's Logstash, it's Beats, it's the client libraries, it's all these, you know, products and projects around OpenSearch, around Elasticsearch. And of course, when people have a look at OpenSearch, the question is, okay, so I don't know, I used, let's say, Beats. Now I want to switch to OpenSearch. So is there any alternative for it? Where's my client library for language XYZ, whatever? So forking is really just pushing a button, but trying to kind of create an ecosystem around OpenSearch that is probably as big as the Elastic ecosystem. That's of course pretty hard. And it's also very hard to keep the development over all these components aligned over the time. And since we're talking, like I said, not about just OpenSearch and OpenSearch dashboards, but all these other projects as well, yeah, keeping the development aligned is a challenge, and testing and QA, of course, is also a challenge because you have all these different plugins like SQL, alerting, k-nearest neighbor, whatever. And the QA and, let's say, release process is challenging because you need to keep everything aligned, of course. And last but not least, we have also the question regarding community building, which is also, as a learning, is also quite hard. Because if you start a project like OpenSearch, which gains a lot of traction, of course, you will naturally get a lot of questions. You will get a lot of questions on your on the forum, on GitHub. There will be a lot of GitHub issues, and maintaining the community, building the community, making sure all the questions are being answered is quite challenging. And of course, if we talk about enterprises, that requires trust and stability. So the question, is the product production ready? What about support? Do you offer any SLAs? What about professional services? So this is the other part of building a community and making a product enterprise ready. So it's not just about doing the fork and maintaining the code, but also building the community and making a product enterprise ready is a big challenge. So again, let's do a quick recap. Go back to the overview here. So OpenSearch is a fork of Elasticsearch. It's forked from Elasticsearch 7.2. It contains the core of OpenSearch and a visualization of dashboards, plus a lot of additional plugins. It's Apache 2 license, can be used for any purpose. It's a community project backed by several major companies. And like I said, if you want to participate, feel free to go to their website, have a look at the roadmap, maybe contribute some code or ask some questions. Okay, so far for the presentation. Now we can do a quick QA.
Quick?
Mm-hmm.
We have 25 minutes left.
Very quick. Yeah.
Thanks for your talk, Jochen. Thank you. Yeah, okay. Some questions, please. Or more than some. We have plenty of time. Nah. Meine Rettung. No. No.
So I have a product where we embed Firebit, Logstash, Elasticsearch, and Kibana, right? I was starting to take a look on the OpenSearch forks, and I saw that I can transition easily the Kibana and the Elasticsearch part, but Logstash filters and a lot of stuff that we do, I don't think it is there yet. You know a little bit more inside information on what they're planning and if this is going to come?
Well, one of the project that's in the making is actually the Ingest and Data Prepper work. They, as far as I know, work on that has started, so it's on the roadmap. So the plans are that you can use this Data Prepper tool, especially for ingest work, which you formerly probably used Logstash and Beats. And regarding the transition, yes, so at the moment, since we're talking about a fork from Elastic 7.10.2, to the best of my knowledge, I think you can transition at the moment quite easily because your data and your indices are compatible. But of course, we're talking about a fork. So what will happen, of course, over the course of the time, the two projects will, of course, diverge. I mean, that's the best bet that I can do at the moment. But since it's just there since beginning of this year, yes, there's some kind of compatibility between the two projects. So migration should be rather straightforward at the moment.
Okay. Anyone else?
Is the former Apache 2 license part of Elasticsearch still maintained as a project? Of course, under the new license, the permissive license, but is there still development in this Elastic area?
That is basically a question that I can't really answer. So the code, of course, is there, 7.10.2, and it's out there. You can still download it and use it. If there are any, backports to this version 7.10.2, like I don't know, security fixes, bug fixes, and whatever, I have to say I don't know if that version will still get any updates.
Please give me one or 2 seconds to arrive at you.
Okay, once a new minor is out, so once 7.11 is out, there won't be any patch releases for 7.10. So you need to be on the latest minor to get any updates.
But this new update. Should we move those together? This new update of Elasticsearch. I fear that there are now 2 third projects out there.
Yes.
And from the outside, doesn't make it less complicated. Yeah? We have here OpenSearch, here Elasticsearch under whatever license. We have Logstash working with this or not this, but this at this version. What I understand, the newest version of Elasticsearch under this new license is still maintained and open for the public without costs. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, so everything you have been using for free before you can still use, but the license is different. So you cannot provide it as a service, for example. Unlike you want to, but you can use Elasticsearch and Kibana as part of your service, but you cannot expose it directly. So if you provide like a cat picture search engine based on Elasticsearch, and Elasticsearch is just in the background, that's perfectly fine. You cannot provide Elasticsearch itself as a service, what AWS is doing. That's the big change.
And coming back to the question regarding bug fixes and stuff like that, so for the open source project, as far as I know, of course there will be backports. So if you're on version 1.1, for example, and the latest version would be 2.0, and there are any critical bugs or security issues, to the best of my knowledge, they will also be backported to older versions of OpenSearch. So there you can then switch from 1.1 to 1.11, 1.12, for example, and have your issue fixed. But I totally agree. Now you have 2, let's say, options if you're talking about search, analytics, logs and stuff like that. So I think there's room for both, of course. There's, of course, Elasticsearch with an Elastic business model, and then you have the OpenSearch with the Apache 2 licensed. Well, not business model, but license. Yeah, and For some projects and customers, maybe using Elastic is the right choice. For others, maybe OpenSearch is the right choice. So in the end, what you will get is you have more choice, you have more options in the market to choose the product and license that suits your use case or your product best. But like I said, with OpenSearch, since it is Apache 2, in my personal opinion, the good thing about it is you don't need to, involve any, legal department to check whether your usage is within the license or not, because it's Apache 2. So you can do whatever you want with it, especially offering managed services.
Okay, maybe when it's too complex, no? Maybe you are a good customer for Splunk. They are rich. They are using Splunk. Yeah, okay.
How much is the power shared across the contributors in OpenSearch? For example, what would it take to change the license again to a I want to earn more money license? Will it just take Amazon and Red Hat to agree, or will you ask every single contributor to do such a license switch again?
You mean what happens, or if the license of OpenSearch could be changed as well?
Yes.
Well, in theory, yes, but since it started as an open source project, this one, in my opinion, will stay under Apache 2 license. At the moment, I don't see any reason why anyone would want to change the license. And like I said, it is initiated by AWS, and you have big players like Red Hat on it. But at its core, it's a community-driven project. So, for example, at the moment, they're looking for maintainers for the client libraries, for example, or maintainers for other repositories. So it's not like AWS kind of, will control what goes into OpenSearch or not. Maybe although they started it, and maybe it's, again, they have a high influence on it. But what we're seeing is that more and more, other players jump on board, maintainers will join. So it's not that it is a product and project by AWS, but it's a true community product. So if you want to participate, if you want to be the maintainer of one repository, you can apply for it, and then you would decide what commit goes into the project or not.
But you still sign a CLA, right?
Implicitly, so if you do a commit, you need to have it signed off by someone. It's what is called DCO, I guess. Yeah.
But the entity that owns the DCO is the only one that can change the license afterwards. That's how Elastic actually relicensed, because everybody signed that CLA check. That's how a relicense works. You need to have like that built in initially, otherwise you cannot just relicense. Or you would need to ask every single contributor. Well,
like I said, in theory, of course, you could. There could be a license change of OpenSearch as well, but I don't see any reason why that should happen, because that would kind of contradict the reason why it has been started in the first place. So.
Right, but I think only AWS owns that right now, because they are the owners of the DCO.
I would need to legally check that. I'm not 100% sure. But what I can say is that, of course, if you contribute, it is Apache 2 code. It stays Apache 2 code. And if AWS could, in theory, change anything, I don't know, could be. But I don't see a reason why.
Thanks, Achim. Yeah, that was very short, no? Okay. Thank you, and enjoy your lunch.